MA did a great job in terms of giving you, again, the global perspective from the Rockefeller Foundation, what we've been engaged in this space for the past 5 years, our research and policy work, our infrastructure building work, our intermediation support and leadership support, and the issues that are really globally prominent around unlocking capital, strengthening demand, really measuring and assessing impact, and improving the enabling environment. And those are global issues, global challenges, global opportunities. She also talked a little bit about the local and what you guys have said. So now what we're going to do is really bring it home. The global local to really bring it home. And we have someone who isn't necessarily homegrown in terms of South Africa, but is definitely homegrown in terms of his commitment to this issue and commitment to Africa. And that is none other than James Mwangi. James is, if those of you who know James, he's sort of an entity in and of himself. And James has always been called, I think probably his whole life, a young gun. I mean, he was, probably first in his class in kindergarten, all the way up, to Harvard. He's just a young gun. This is a Harvard guy, a McKinsey guy. So all the branding that you would want from somebody to sort of at least be a leader in this space. And we at the foundation and others have taken his talents internal to some degree, and he helped lead the team that developed the seminal report on impact investing in West Africa. James now is the CEO and group managing partner for Delbert Development Advisors. And James will lead us in a conversation with an esteemed panel that he will introduce in a session called Making Impact Investing Happen Locally, Unlocking Capital for Impact Investing in the Region. So really this unlocking capital piece. And James and his panelists will aspire to address the obstacles, but again, I'm an optimist, right? So the opportunities for unlocking that capital. So with that, let me bring James to the stage, and James will introduce his panel.
Thank you, CD, for that excessively generous introduction, riddled with inaccuracies and exaggerations. But I'll take it, and hopefully try not to live too far below it. The discussion right now is about unlocking capital for impact investing, and specifically looking locally. And I think we're going to be talking about two things in tandem. One is bringing more capital into the lens of investing for impact. So how is it that we mobilize more? And secondly, how is it that capital that's coming in is realizing greater impact? I think unlocking capital is both about unlocking greater funds, but also unlocking the potential of those funds to really have a positive impact in a way that speaks to the investing discipline. And I think we have a fantastic panel of perspectives around different approaches to investing for, with, and through impact in Africa. And I'll ask them to individually come up. Wendy Luhabe needs no introduction to many in this room who are familiar with this country, or more broadly with women pioneers in the investing and business sectors. I'll mention that she is the chair and founder of the Women's Private Equity Fund, but that is just one of many roles that she has played. And I think what she will bring as a lens to this discussion is a perspective both about bringing new types of investors into the markets, as well as thinking as a social entrepreneur and someone familiar with the broader corporate landscape around, what is the role of that modifier impact in the term impact investor, and how is it that we really bring it to life. Nicola Galombik is an executive director at Yellowoods. I always enjoy introducing Yellowoods because they're an investment vehicle with holdings in financial services, the restaurant sector, hospitality, and usually I say, well, are you familiar with the financial services holdings, companies like Hollard, Clientele, etc. And some people say, yes, I know those, and I'm very familiar with those. And then some of the people still are blank, and I'll say, well, are you familiar with their holdings in the restaurant space, like Nando's? And most people will say yes. In fact, I'm having a piece of chicken right now. And for the last few stubborn ones, have you ever had a bottle of wine from Spear? And then usually everyone else comes through. So many of you have been touched in some way by Yellowoods. And finally, I'll ask Sam Nwanze, CEO of Heirs Holdings from Nigeria, to come forward. And I think, Sam, you're in an interesting position because you're building up a really exciting portfolio in a rapidly growing economy. And in the relationship between Heirs and the Tony Elumelu Foundation and the broader thinking around how you continue to invest for returns, but with an eye on impact. It would be interesting to get your view both on Nigeria as well as that particular positioning. So we're looking to have an interesting discussion, and we'll also try and leave as much time as possible for a conversation with all of you, because I find there's nothing as frustrating as seeing a great panel pulled together, people I really want to hear from, and then some moderator goes on and on and on and on like I'm doing right now. So in a sense. So the question we've been asked to tackle is, how do you unlock capital? And I want to break it into 2 points that I'll ask each of the panelists to kind of weigh in on in turn, maybe building on their own particular experience. The first is, how do you factor, what does impact investing mean in your current role, and for each of you, and I'll rephrase it a little bit in each of your cases. So Sam, you're at Heirs Holding. You're a commercial investor. You're looking to generate returns, but you also have, at your heart, a very clear purpose for Nigeria and for the broader continent. So how is it that you're approaching impact investing? And specifically, what have you seen that has worked for you in unleashing capital towards impact? So what is working for you?
Okay, thanks. First of all, let me just make a quick correction so that I'm sure I have a job when I get back to Lagos. I am the Chief Investment Officer for Heirs Holdings. I'm not the Chief Executive Officer for Heirs Holdings. So I want that to go out on Twitter so they can follow. At Heirs Holdings, what we do is we like to call ourselves a long-term investment company. And when we talk about long-term, we look at long-term investment from 2 perspectives. One is we invest long-term in terms of the tenor, but more importantly is we invest in businesses that have a business model that is sustainable in the long term. And if you think about that concept, it therefore means you have to have a business that encapsulates shared value. So it has to be businesses that are not just looking at generating a financial return, but also businesses that have some kind of social or developmental angle to the way they operate. Having said that, on the Heirs Holding side, we don't, so we focus on that more from a business model perspective, as opposed to the way the foundation would look at it, which is more of trying to sieve out clear social variables that they will use to measure impact in the long run. But I'll say for us, we feel that if you're going to do business in Africa, and this is fundamental to the principle of our founder, if you're going to do business, if Africa is truly going to develop, we can only develop when we make long-term investments that not only cater for, the commercial appetite of the investor, but also has a bias in ensuring that there is social impact. I don't know if that addresses your question.
It does, Sam, and it speaks very well to one of the heated debates that took place yesterday. Well, it wasn't heated, it was an involved debate in the conversation yesterday around whether the intent of the business matters for the impact investor. In other words, you're saying that for you, you're looking for well-run businesses that also, in the course of their business, have a positive social impact, rather than necessarily requiring that they have a declared social impact or mandate or mission. And I think that's an interesting debate, and there's some interesting trade-offs there. Nicola, Sam is approaching this in part from a perspective of continuing, to build out a portfolio and making new investments. At Yellowoods, you already have a very extensive portfolio, and your approach to thinking about impact in your investments is somewhat different as a result. Would you like to speak more about that and about how you think about unlocking the potential for impact and additional capital there?
Thanks, James. I mean, I think on the intent question, I think the intent, in a sense, sits with us as an investor, which I think links to what Emma was saying earlier. I mean, we're a finance-first investor, but with a very clear and specific intent that as we extend wealth and grow our investment portfolio and the business in which we're invested, that we be a catalyst for what we call significant and enduring positive change. And for us, that is simply a virtuous cycle. It's a sustainable economic model, and it's a virtuous cycle which we have committed ourselves to in the way that we do business and the business that we do. And we are constantly in the process of identifying the opportunity to find financial and social value in one place and not see them. I mean, there will always be micro trade-offs, as there are on the balance scorecard, for example, of any company. There are micro trade-offs all the time. But we don't see them to be macro trade-offs in the long term, and we do take a long view, which is possibly, given our position as a private investment holding company, it can take a long view and is a strategic investor in our businesses. But I think that what maybe just to speak to the differentiation that you mentioned, James, is that we are constantly working with our operating businesses as the key levers and platforms for social value creation. So rather than investing parallel to those operating businesses, using post-tax profits effectively, or creating micro systems within those operating businesses, we're looking at the core value chains and the core operations and trying to understand where the biggest levers are for social value creation. So in our financial services businesses, that would be in inclusive markets, in innovative financing solutions, using commercial insurance or microinsurance expertise to drive social change. In our restaurant and leisure businesses, it may be in the way supply chains are managed and the way procurement and resources are used and grown. And across all of our businesses, a very significant opportunity around how we drive inclusive employment and inclusive the opportunity for youth economic inclusion, for example, just through the way in which those businesses operate, where they choose to operate, how they choose to operate. And as an investor, I would like to say, a sort of proactive catalyst with our businesses. We're a different kind of activist shareholder that is focusing our businesses through an integrated value, shareholder value framework on delivering more than financial returns, and we measure more than financial returns.
So, in a sense, what you're saying is, for you, the pursuit of impact as an investor doesn't end with finding a nice, impactful business and putting capital into it. It's in everything you do after that. It's post-investment. It's in engaging with the management on a day-to-day basis in any business and saying, are we getting as much of an impact return as we can be from this holding, regardless of, or in addition to the financial return that we're expecting?
Yes, and I think that we call it inclusive and sustainable growth. And I think the growth idea is a really important one. Why should we treat social value as something static and financial value as something that we expect to grow? I mean, the notion of growth should apply to both. So the idea of multiplier effects, of efficiencies, of growth and leverage should apply as much to our thinking about social value creation as it does to financial value creation. So in that sense, we're constantly trying to think with our business leaders, with the executives who run the businesses, about where the hotspots are for those opportunities, and to think of them that way, rather than as static impacts.
Wendy, as we turn our eye to you in your work, particularly with the Women's Private Equity Fund, but elsewhere, there's an interesting dimension here, not just in terms of the investments being made, but who is investing and bringing new voices to the space. I'd be curious to know if that change in who the investor is also changes the approach or the mindset towards investing in any way, or if indeed we're just saying, part of the benefit is bringing a new set of eyes and a new perspective, but actually the discipline is more or less the same.
Well, thank you. Good morning. I guess my starting point is just overall on the premise of impact investing. And I was really encouraged to hear what Emma was sharing, because I think it's important and quite critical for us to have a shared understanding of what we mean and understand by impact investing if we want to accelerate its impact in the region. So I just want to offer that as a comment. I hadn't come across the concept of impact investing before I was invited to this conference. And when I look at some of the things that I have been involved in, intuitively that's what we've done. And for me, it's really about finding creative ways and sustainable ways for ordinary people to become investors in the economy. And that's what we did with WePoll. We were able to mobilize 20 years ago 18,000 women to become investors in a portfolio of investments that we created, with contributions as small as 600 Rand and as much as millions for people who had much more to invest. And this is important for me because we can't really create sustainable growth if communities and local people and ordinary people are themselves not invested in the economy. So the idea of investing that brings in capital from other parts of the world, of course it serves a purpose and it's important, but it cannot be the only equation, it cannot be the only element of the equation. I'm really more in favor of an equation that brings capital, global capital, into the continent, obviously, but I'm also really interested in a model that finds ways for local people to be investors in the economy, because I think the reasons are quite obvious. We can't create an economy that grows if the per capita income of ordinary people doesn't grow. There's sufficient evidence from various studies that have been done which shows that growth that's really meaningful, that's really impactful, has to express itself in ordinary people's per capita income growing. And if that doesn't happen, if that cannot be achieved, then we have to go back to the drawing board and really re-examine what we're actually trying to accomplish. So I'm not in support of a model that creates a much greater elite. That's where we are now as the world. We have huge gaps between people who have obscene amounts of wealth and people who really have very, very little. And in looking at how we rectify that, we have to make sure that people at the bottom of the pyramid have participated in the growth.
So if I could ask a follow-up to that, because I think you make the point very clearly that part of the impact is the impact on the people investing, not just on the investments. I'm curious about, on the one hand, we're talking about unlocking capital for impact investing, and I think you're right, that mobilizing capital from the large mass of African people who are currently excluded from the investment space is a key step towards doing so. I am curious about, firstly, what is it that we could be doing to bring, more of the general public, if you will, into the investment space? And secondly, do you see a difference in how that group invests and how they engage and the kinds of transactions or investments that are appetizing to them vis-a-vis the current kind of more elite or non-African driven investing?
I don't think there's a difference in terms of what people want to get in terms of the return. When people invest, it doesn't matter whether they have a lot of money or they have little money, they want to get returns from their investment. I think the crucial thing is to educate people. What we did with Women Investment Portfolio Holdings was that we actually invested 2 years traveling through the length and the breadth of the country, educating women about the economy, how the economy functions, how to become investors. The benefit of that investment was not just that women understood how the economy functions, was that they began to understand the importance of taking responsibility for their financial responsibility. I think in the continent it's important that women have responsibility for their financial independence, because we know there's sufficient evidence that when we invest in women, the nation benefits. So, but they need to understand how that works, and what has happened for many generations is that women have been deprived from understanding how to participate in the economy. So education, I think there was a question that was asked by someone about how do we bring in the environmental dimension of what we're discussing? It really has to be about education, and that takes time. We have to educate people. We have to make sure that they understand. We have to do it over and over and over again. But people who tend to be in the investment field, you know, they want immediate results. But if we want to change the face of the continent, we have to understand that it requires time, it requires effort, it requires repetition. We have to go over and over and over again over things until people really get them and own them. We will not be able to grow this economy if people do not own some of the solutions that we want to provide. It's helpful to bring in people from other parts of the world to make a contribution, but we cannot exclude people who live in this continent. And women are an important component of that equation.
Thank you. Sam, both a comment, if you wish to add on to that, and then I would also like to, have you put on. I think CD was making people put on evangelist hats of different kinds earlier on in terms of things that they would like to have this audience pick up on and move forward. Sitting where you're sitting and you look at this group of people who've gathered, who come from a range of perspectives in terms of what impact investing is, what's the message that would be most valuable to get out there? What are you looking for? Is it a pipeline of certain kinds of deals? What is it that will help unlock a greater potential of impact investing in your view?
Yeah, first of all, let me just say something on what Wendy said. I think so the point Wendy made, I think, is absolutely right. And I think that her organization is the organization that is actually creating the social impact. So she has a fund that has these 18,000 women, people who are, at the bottom of the pyramid, invest in the fund. That's, and it's not the investment that fund makes that is necessarily the focus of the impact investment, but the whole concept of a fund itself. Because what it does is, it allows inclusion from people who are socially excluded to participate in investments, and then they will build that experience of putting money into something and generating the return in and of itself, I think is impact. So that I just wanted to make that point. Now, just to talk a bit about, I also have another point I want to make later on with respect to the subject of intent. Or maybe I should just say that because I think that much as we are saying that we should look at intent from the perspective of the investor, I don't think that is anything new. I think from the origin of impact investment itself, the investor has that intent of trying to create social impact while making financial return. And I worry that if we try to take out intent, as part of the things we actively look for from the organizations we invest in, we have what is called goal incongruence. And you have a scenario where somewhere down the line, the guy, the sponsor, the guy who runs the company may want to run along a certain line that may be at variance with what your own goals is as an investor. And then you have a nightmare scenario. So I think whilst it's very difficult, and I agree, to evaluate the intent of the organization, I think as impact investors, we need to look out for that. And it needs to be high on because whatever the guy who is running the business doesn't want to focus on, you really can't do much, right? That's why when you make investments, you're actually investing in people. And so you need to you need to drive that from his side also. Otherwise, you'll be pushing things that he feels is irritable to his business and to the goals he's trying to achieve, and you at the end of the day don't achieve your goals. I just want to make that point. So just talking a bit about unlocking capital in this space. Now there are a couple of things, from where we sit. I think Weber, I don't know if Weber, I wasn't around yesterday, but I don't know if Weber has mentioned this. We're a young organization, 2.5 years. From the time we started in 2011, we were very passionate about impact investment, and we've done 2 major impact investments, and they are on a scale. They are at a level that I think will scale massively over the coming years. But out of the 2 we've done, I can say, we've probably seen in the last 2.5 years, I won't be exaggerating if I said 500, right? We see opportunities that people bring to us on a regular basis. But the problem is we can't put money into those opportunities because they are not, structured in a way that it can attract capital. If you put money into those businesses as presented, they will just become, you have a failure story as far as impact investment is concerned. And this is one of the key challenges that we see. So I think one of the things that needs to happen, and is what we are trying to do in our organization, is to rethink the way we actually carry out impact investment. There have been a lot of talk around there are no pipeline opportunities. But our view is there are pipeline opportunities, but it's just a question of how we view investment. Most oftentimes we want to put in money into, like one of the criteria we had is you have to have generated some kind of cash flow, or if not, you have to have gone past the stage of proofing the concept of your business. But the guy who is looking for that money is actually looking for capital to allow him to prove that concept and to get him to that first set of cash flows. Now, because he doesn't meet that criteria, he's excluded from our impact investment portfolio. And so you have a scenario where for that capital to unlock, we have to rethink the way we look at impact investments. Either we have these intermediate organizations that help fix these problems that these idea generators have and bring them to a stage where they attract capital, or the guys who are making the investment take a step, another step lower and take a higher level of risk to be able to catalyze the kind of impact and financial return that they are looking for. I think that's one thing. Second thing is, like we've talked about here, and this has been ongoing. I remember when I went for the GIM Investor Council in 2011, there's this whole story of, how do we, there's a lot of capital in the investment world. So you have sovereign wealth funds, billions of dollars. You have, pension funds, billions of dollars, family offices, all sorts, banks. How do we get a piece of that pie and channel that, capital into the impact investing space? Now that is, if we can achieve that, we'll really be taking this thing to another level. But that is a Herculean task in my view, because we have to first of all change the way the traditional commercial investor thinks about investing. So the first thing is he wants to see a business that will generate a return. And if the business opportunities we present, we tell a lot more of the social story. We try to sell it to them with a language that they are not used to. If you went to a private equity firm that is, hard-nosed commercial private equity firm, and you packaged an impact investment opportunity and told him, oh, this will create so and so impact, he would be happy, but in his mind, he immediately assumes that that business is not going to generate sufficient return, for his portfolio. And so there is the bias that he would have with that. So we have to find a way of changing the way we look at impact investment. I feel oftentimes we look at impact investment from a perspective of suboptimal financial return, and that already will push out, opportunities to capitalize on capital that is available.
Nicola, the same question around a point you'd make in terms of where we go next and how you'd see this room, but I'd actually like your particular comment on that perception that pursuing impact necessarily leads to or has to be related with suboptimal financial returns, and to what extent is that reflected in your experience with Yellowoods? How do you deal with any trade-offs that arise? Maybe say a little bit more about that.
I think that the first thing to say, it struck me as well when Wendy was talking. I think that if one thinks about inclusive economy as a kind of general goal, defined in the way that Wendy said, we talk about reduction in inequality and an increase in the incomes of ordinary individuals and the spread of wealth and income. There are so many different things and ways that needs to happen. There's no, whether it's, and in any business and in any business model, there are the opportunities and the spaces and the need for inclusive economic thinking and models. Whether it's about who is the shareholder and the investor, whether it's about who is the beneficiary of services, whether it is about who is able to be employed in your supply chain. I mean, there's just so many aspects of inclusive economy. So, and I just want to reinforce that, because I think we sometimes have I find inclusive economy a useful idea, or inclusive economic development, because it is much wider than the traditional notion of social. And I think sometimes the word social limits everybody's thinking. Whereas a lot of the things that, and I'm not saying it should, but I think it does. I think it starts creating the binaries in people's minds that I think we're referring to. Whereas, I mentioned that balanced scorecard idea earlier, but that's an idea that's had currency in business schools and business for decades. And nobody thinks that, investing in IT systems is somehow antithetical to profit, but it absorbs a lot of capital, which takes a long time to reap any benefit, and often doesn't actually, right? And I think it's the same with people. In fact, people assume that you have to invest in people to make money, right? So I think that one of our challenges is to, try and get broader ideas about what we mean, and I think our language is just going to change over time to help us break down some of these binary things. In our businesses, it's amazing to watch executives who historically have only ever thought about money getting incredibly excited about impacts they can have in the world, because they see it as opportunities, but they can engage in problem solving and opportunity spaces and growth opportunities. And so I think about how one shifts the mindsets is not just by breaking down this binary idea of social and money as things, but also thinking a lot about, capital is not only, a lot of capital is deployed inside businesses in their daily growth processes, as opposed to in these investment processes that are from outside and people coming in. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity to harness and leverage the capital that is being deployed every day in very large business machines in a new way. And that also then changes the mindset of the investment community, I think, over time. Because when businesses pursue these things and succeed, I think investors start looking at returns and results differently. So I think there's maybe virtuous cycles in that, but.
Thank you. Wendy, you have the last word before we open it out to what I'm sure will be many questions and comments from the group. Given what you've heard and the point you made about bringing, the impact being in part about bringing the investor in, any last observations on the role that the broader community of people interested in impact investing or having impact through investing can have in the days ahead?
I want to expand on something that Sam said. There's a huge gap between where capital sits and the state of readiness, which really could potentially generate a huge pipeline. So whether it's incubation that's required, I'm not sure, but there's something that needs to take place to close that gap, so that the capital is more comfortable to invest in the wealth of ideas that really exist in the bottom, but are never qualified sufficiently to attract capital. So I think this is a valid point that would be useful for us to explore some more as we continue this conversation. There's something that you said about the kinds of investments that we make. I think it's critical that we are conscious to make the kinds of investments that are in the productive sectors of the economy. So let me give you an example. There are some solar technologies, for example, that are available that could be used. Energy is a big challenge in the continent. A lot of people don't have access to electricity, and you know that electricity could give people access to technology, and I mean, it really impacts so many areas of our lives. So there's a technology that at a cost of $2 million could produce 40 megawatts of energy. But the beauty about this technology is that it would be possible to distribute the energy in much smaller units than we currently do. We assume that everybody requires 220 volts of energy, and this is not true. People at the bottom of the pyramid, people who live in poor households, would actually live their lives quite comfortably with 12 volts, 12 units of volts of electricity.